Well, for more on this developing story, I can welcome Shirley Sitbon from our news desk. She'll be joining me in the studio. And we can also now bring in our guest, Christopher Sabatini, Senior Research Fellow for Latin America, U.S., and the Americas program at Chatham House. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. I want to begin with what's just happened in Venezuela. The U.S. there escalating things. It went from striking alleged drug boats to striking Venezuela and removing President Maduro and his wife. A pretty significant escalation. So, what is President Trump's end game here?
Well, it's funny because, of course, the narrative has changed dramatically over the course of this buildup, which has been now occurring for over 6 months. This originally started, as your report indicated, being justified by taking out narcotics traffickers and trying to hurt the what Trump administration has designated as a foreign terrorist organization, the Maduro government, to then sort of taking out these alleged narco boats, to then saying that Nicolas Maduro had to leave, to now what we're seeing occur on their screens right now at this very moment, and his removal. This was always about regime change. The truth is that Donald Trump simply had hoped before that this could occur by simply a show of force that could rattle the military and the inner circle around Maduro. That didn't work. It led to, over the course of the last 6 months, these attacks on these alleged narco boats. And then, quite frankly, when that didn't work, the Donald Trump administration found that it had to do something to make good on its objectives, or it would look weak. And it became down to Donald Trump or Nicolas Maduro, quite frankly. What the end game is right now, we don't know. At the very least, because this narrative has changed so much, at the very least, from his latest statements from a few weeks ago, this is about taking out Nicolas Maduro. That's happened. Now the question comes, what comes next? Will some remnants of the Nicolas Maduro regime be allowed to stay in power? That would not be sufficient for the Democratic opposition. It wouldn't please Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's in close contact with the Democratic opposition of Venezuela. But the truth is this is going to be a long-term commitment. And does Donald Trump have the stomach for the diplomatic, economic, and quite likely military responsibilities for having effectively decapitated an illegitimate government in Venezuela? We have to recognize that, but one in which now there's a huge power vacuum.
Now, as you mentioned there, Christopher, there is a power void. Do you see this as an opportunity for the opposition to step in? And if so, is there reason to be optimistic?
I would like to be optimistic. There is a Democratic opposition. It's the leadership. It's de facto leader. Maria Corina Machado won the Nobel Peace Prize this year. She's currently outside the country. There were elections last year in which her stand-in candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, clearly won the elections. Those elections were denied by the Maduro government, but the international community, with the exception of the gallery of rogue regimes that support the Venezuelan government right now, but the international community from Europe, Latin America, the United States, and Canada denounced those elections. But the truth is how you move from a deeply corrupt autocratic regime in which all you've done is remove one president to a democratic transition is unclear because, quite frankly, and understandably, the Democratic opposition has been taking names and numbers and following who are those responsible for human rights abuses, who are responsible for maintaining the 800 or so political prisoners that are currently rotting away in Venezuelan jails, who's responsible for the economic collapse, who's responsible for the illicit activities. They are not going to necessarily, those criminal elements in the current regime are not going to throw open the doors and welcome in Maria Corina Machado, who you're seeing right now on your screens, because she's made it very clear. They are the enemy. She is not willing to accept, and I understand this, an interim government that could negotiate some exit. She wants change, but it's not going to be easy because, quite frankly, right now, even though Nicolas Maduro isn't in the presidential palace, he's probably on a flight somewhere to the United States as we speak, even though he's not in the presidential palace, all of those elements, whether security forces or civilian elements, remain in place. And how they will be dislodged to create some form of legitimate democratic transition is unclear. And quite frankly, I'll be honest, I think the government of Donald Trump has been dangerously naive in how that will occur.
Christopher, thank you. Stay with us. I want to bring in
Okay.
Shirley Sitbon from our news desk. So you heard him saying there that it's going to be a long, long road to democracy in Venezuela, and we sort of have this void. Do you agree with what he's saying?
Absolutely. We've heard other experts and people on the ground there saying that it is a situation that is extremely rare, to say the least, but it remains fluid. It's an opportunity for the opposition, but it's not necessarily the most likely road ahead to have the opposition coming in right now and taking all the posts. It's more likely, they said, that one way or another, the people who remain from Nicolas Maduro's authorities will try and find some kind of solution to replace him. So that's more likely, whether it's done in a very organized way or in more chaotic way. Not very clear. We'll see how this moves along. So yes, everybody basically watching the situation, starting with the people in Venezuela, as we've heard our correspondent earlier saying that people remain at home and follow this very closely.
And Shirley, when we were speaking earlier, we were also talking about possible reasons for why the Trump administration was focusing on Venezuela. They had said it's drug trafficking and they want to stop that, but there's also that issue of oil that's one of the major natural resources there. So, what role has all of that played in the thinking of the administration?
Well, that's one of the questions. Which ones of the elements are more important to Donald Trump? They all play in. Of course, we've heard Nicolas Maduro saying many times that the U.S. is just trying to topple him so they can seize oil reserves and make some money with Venezuela's own resources. But we've also talked about the statement this is making for Donald Trump in other parts of the world as well, showing a show of strength, sending a message to Iran, to other areas, to China, because who's been buying Venezuelan oil? 80% of it goes to China. China has criticized, of course, what the U.S. has done in recent weeks and months, including the seizing of oil tankers, but not much more. Of course, today reactions could become stronger. But yes, there are many elements that come into play here. They all come into play, and which ones are the most important and crucial for Donald Trump? I do not know. But yes, of course, the drug trafficking, he's talked about it many times, saying that Nicolas Maduro was at the heart of this trafficking ring. He's brought no proof to that. There is drug trafficking, but many say that it's more limited than other countries. It goes through Venezuela. There is some production in Venezuela, but it's not where most of the trafficking is being done, according to some of the experts. So yeah, many things coming into play.
Christopher, I want to bring you back in now and follow up on that and what Shirley's been saying regarding China and Iran and Venezuelan oil. We know the strikes that were carried out did not damage any of the oil facilities in Venezuela. So what is it, how does this fit into U.S. foreign policy globally?
Good question. So first of all, I have to echo Shirley's skepticism about this being about oil. I think it's a convenient narrative for the former Nicolas Maduro president and the regime to claim, this is all about sort of neo-imperialism and access to natural resources. I don't think that is the case. There are competing streams here that have to do even with immigration, security, narco trafficking, and even pressure from a significant portion of Venezuelan Americans and Cuban Americans in Florida who want to see the Nicolas Maduro regime collapse. Internationally, we'll have to see how this plays out. It's not a coincidence that this is occurring at the same time there are large popular protests in Iran, and that Donald Trump has said that he is locked and loaded, his words, to respond to any attacks against peaceful protesters in Iran. It's clearly an effort to send a signal across Latin America, not even so much in terms of the specifics of the Nicolas Maduro government, but in terms of that the Donald Trump administration will not tolerate any form of narco trafficking, even if it's alleged. In this case, as Shirley had mentioned, it's not clear that Venezuela is that large a source of narcotics entering the United States. But here's where the real problem lies, is for many cases, this is really about Donald Trump's own very narrow partisan vision of Latin America. He just recently pardoned the former president of Honduras, who was convicted in a U.S. court for facilitating the smuggling of more than 400 tons of cocaine to the United States. He pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president, but now claims that Venezuela is central to this. This is really about rewarding allies, threatening those who could be on the cusp of breaking with U.S. foreign policy interests, and punishing those who do. And that's what this is really about. Now, when it comes to China, it's also intended to hurt China. As Shirley mentioned, 80% of Venezuela's illegal oil, because Venezuelan oil produced by the state and the state oil company PDVSA is under U.S. sanctions. Any oil that leaves Venezuela that is not sort of unsanctioned by the U.S. is illegal. So it's also trying to cut off that supply to China, although quite frankly, China doesn't need that much of Venezuela oil. Mostly that was to pay off old loans that China had given to the Maduro and his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, to sustain the government. This is less about the geopolitics than it is about the signaling of what the Donald Trump administration is willing to tolerate in the Western Hemisphere. And that includes Chinese influence and Iranian influence, alleged Iranian influence in the hemisphere.
Christopher, thank you. I want you to stay with us because now we're going to be able to cross over to Caracas and speak with journalist Norris Argot Soto. Norris, nice to have you back on the program. So when we spoke before, you said people have been reaching out. So I just want to follow up on that and say, how are Venezuelans reacting to these latest developments now?
Well, as for now, we are receiving reports of people already on the street, but in a state of commotion, trying to purchase as many items as they can, many goods as they can. They are doing lines, long lines in supermarkets, groceries, pharmacies. We journalists have been very active on social media, trying to call on people to stay calm and to not go out on the streets today, because we are not sure of how the situation will develop, how the government, how the remaining officials from the Maduro regime are going to react moving forward in these coming hours. There are some rumors that Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, is not in the country. So many people reporting that she fled to Russia, but we are not sure yet. So this is all rumors and whispers about the current situation. What we know is that people is waking up to this news. Not everybody had the opportunity to leave all the situation in the early hours of the morning. So many people are just waking up and finding out what happened. And there's a lot of lines in several points of Caracas.
And now, Norris, we had discussed this earlier as well. The country currently in a state of emergency. So what does that look like?
Like I said, this is something that Maduro's regime has been announcing since 2 or 3 months ago, but they haven't been specific on in what to this decree of emergency entails. In a normal situation, in a constitutional situation, when a government proclaims a decree of foreign emergency or foreign commotion, this has to go through the National Assembly. The National Assembly has to vote and approve it, and therefore it has to be published in the National Gazette. All of these steps haven't been accomplished or followed through. So we Venezuelans don't exactly know what this decree entails and what powers does it give to the remaining officials here in Venezuela.
And now that Maduro is allegedly gone, what are some possible scenarios to replace him?
Well, there's another information we've gathered from other media saying that allegedly Secretary Marco Rubio and other officials are saying that the main goal of Donald Trump was to reinstate democracy in Venezuela, and of course that they will support Maria Corina Machado and the government of Edmundo Gonzalez. But this is all rumors as well. We need to wait and see what Trump is going to say in his presser that's coming in a few hours, maybe 2-3 hours from now. This is all a lot of my sources said, and sources said that. So what we know right now is that Maduro is gone, that probably one of his right hands, either Delcy Rodriguez or his brother Jorge Rodriguez, might take power. Or there's the other scenario that the U.S. actually brings helps Edmundo Gonzalez to come back to the country and try to put him into power after winning the 2024 elections.
Norris, thank you so much for keeping us updated on this fast developing story. Christopher, I want to bring you back in. So you heard here from Caracas about possible scenarios going forward. We're all waiting to hear what President Trump is going to say in his press conference. Any idea on what his remarks are going to reveal?
Wow, Catherine, that's a tough question. You're asking me to predict what Donald Trump is going to say. Let me put it this way. First, Donald Trump has been very clear of the limited nature of this. I mean, he's moved the goalposts. It was originally about taking out narcotics traffickers, but he did in recent weeks start to talk about the removal of Nicolas Maduro. He's never gone as far as Marco Rubio is alleged to have gone in your previous report, saying that this is supposed to be a democratic transition. The Democratic opposition has to take power. That is, quite frankly, a very long bridge, because Delcy Rodriguez and her brother Jorge Rodriguez, that was just mentioned, they were both mentioned, are very close to Nicolas Maduro. They represent, if you will, the civilian face of the Nicolas Maduro government. There's the more security and military face of the Nicolas Maduro government, which is represented by Diosdado Cabello, the interior minister, and Pedro Lopez, the defense minister. Those two sides have often been at odds. On the one hand, you have the civilian face, which is a little more, if you will, acceptable to the international community, but still deeply embedded in the corruption as well as the repression that has marked the Maduro government. On the other hand, you have the military side, the security side. They are in many ways the source of much of the corruption. They obviously have the guns, they have the security apparatus, but neither side will at all move aside to let in Maria Corina Machado to become the president. There's going to have to be a process of negotiation or even ramped up military action to basically defeat those elements of the remnants of the Maduro government so that Maria Corina Machado can come into power. It's unclear how far the Donald Trump administration will be willing to go. We'll see. We'll probably hear elements of this in the news conference today, basically at 4 o'clock UK time. But what we don't know is, will Marco Rubio and the Democratic opposition be willing to stand aside if Donald Trump says, you know what, I've accomplished my more limited objectives of removing Nicolas Maduro. This is sufficient for me. How this will play out both within his administration and within the discussions of the Democratic opposition of Venezuela is still unclear. But clearly, the remnants of the Maduro government are doing everything they can to stay in power to some degree. And quite frankly, they're not about to open the doors of the Palacio Miraflores, the presidential palace, to Maria Corina Machado, as unfortunate as that may be.
Now, Christopher, the U.S. has a long history of, maybe some would say, meddling in the region. In your opinion, where does today's actions fall in terms of interventions?
This is really on the extreme end of interventions. First of all, you're right. Meddling is a polite way to say it. I'll even put a more sharp term to it, which is intervention. But the truth be told, over the last 20, 30 years, since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of communism, the U.S. has been, with a few exceptions, Panama being one of them in '89. But most of these cases, this has been about trying to promote a process of electoral change, respecting human rights, not intervening, building partnerships. Even when those have broken down, the U.S., perhaps too politely, has tried to remove distance from that and try to engage international partners in trying to nudge even recalcitrant governments such as the Nicaraguan government and the Venezuelan government into a democracy. That proved impossible in the case of Venezuela. But this is really a page back. And even the Donald Trump administration has referred to this as the Don Roe Doctrine, or the Monroe Doctrine with a Trump corollary, which is it will do everything it can within its military power to prevent foreign intervention, and to protect U.S. national interests. And that's precisely what we're seeing right now. This is a very different playbook than we saw under Biden and even under Trump 1. And I think we're heading into a new era in U.S. Venezuelan relations, because again, this is not just about Venezuela. This is about sending a message to the rest of the hemisphere and really to the rest of the world, as I mentioned in the case of Iran, that the U.S. means business and it will defend its national interests, even if it means kinetic, targeted strikes in national territory.
Christopher, thank you. Stay with us. I'm going to bring Shirley back in. So you heard him say here, this is about the U.S. sending a message. Do you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely. Actually, I had a question for him because I was wondering, we were looking at international reactions, and among them, we were looking at Europe now with the European Union saying that, well, the rule of law must be applied. We've just heard that reaction, but we heard Spain, and Spain is calling to de-escalate, but also to mediate. It's offering to mediate between the United States and Venezuela. Where do you see this going? Is this something that is likely? What kind of thing are they likely to mediate? Where can this go?
It's good. It's a good point, Shirley. So it is. I don't think it's likely to go very far. And I can say, having spoken to European diplomats over the last couple of months, many of them felt they were being shut out of this entire process. They were quick to denounce the stolen elections of 2024. But the truth is, and one European diplomat described it in this way, they feel like they're watching a train wreck. The problem is that for many elements of the Trump administration, which, as we know, in other diplomatic areas, does not trust the Europeans, and has really been asking them to raise their game. This is really Donald Trump's strategy. And I find it very difficult to believe that Donald Trump will rely on a Spanish government that it already doesn't trust because it's dragging its feet on committing 5% of its GDP to defense spending under NATO rules. I find it difficult to believe the Trump administration will allow any of these governments that have been, let's say, a little bit more quiet on this buildup, have not stood by the United States, to now intervene, because they will see them as being, or they will fear that they will sell out the Democratic opposition. And so they're going to go at this in as unilateral a strategy as possible, unless there's some sort of coalition of governments that includes more Trump adjacent governments. I don't think they're going to go with a European Union or even a Spanish. The Brazilian government, President Lula, has also offered to mediate. I don't think that will go anywhere. Brazil had its chance to do something when it had a special envoy in Venezuela during the election of 2024, and they didn't do anything. I think, quite frankly, this is Donald Trump's game, and he's going to play it until the very end.
Yeah, Christopher, I just want to follow up on that. So Donald Trump, as you said, he's going to do what he wants. But what about regional players, Colombia, the neighbors of Venezuela? Is there an opportunity here for them?
This is the region that's become deeply divided ideologically right now. And it's funny because historically, Latin America has tended to be very, have great amounts of solidarity and a sort of regional coherence in their approach to diplomacy. That's not occurring now. There's no way, given the war of words that has occurred between the U.S. government, and Donald Trump in particular, and the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, that he will allow Gustavo Petro to play any role in negotiated settlements in Venezuela. In fact, Gustavo Petro wrote earlier this morning that Colombia now has a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council, and they are going to be raising this as a violation of international law. The other governments that are closer to Donald Trump, that includes Javier Milei in Argentina. That includes the incoming president, Jose Antonio Cast of Chile. That includes Rodrigo Paz of Bolivia. They're unlikely to really take a leadership role in this as much as they probably should. Part of that is because there's a constituency in all these governments that doesn't want to see them intervene, but also because, quite frankly, it's unclear what they could actually achieve in this. They will quite likely follow the Donald Trump administration. Javier Milei has been very clear about this, about supporting the Democratic opposition. Maria Corina Machado is a legitimate sort of, if you will, party for Venezuela. But I can't see them playing a constructive role in this because there's not much of a difference between them and Donald Trump right now.
Christopher, thank you so much for sharing your analysis with us on this developing story. That's Christopher Sabatini, Senior Research Fellow for Latin America, U.S., and the Americas program at Chatham House. And again, I want to thank Shirley for joining me on set, analyzing everything that's been happening with this developing story in Venezuela.